YTPC, my brothers and sisters of the Leaf, you are not seeing a ghost of Gettysburg, but you're oh-ho-ho. Uncle Butter coming right back at you. We're going to put this so you can see it. I come to you today, there you go. I come to you today for a few reasons. As many of you well know, that I'm a resident of the Gettysburg area in Pennsylvania. And one of the most important events in American history happened in Gettysburg. In fact, I'd say two of the most important events. Of course, one being the Battle of Gettysburg, July 1st, 2nd, and 3rd, 1863. And the second of which was the recitation of the Gettysburg Address, a famous speech given by our 16th President, Abraham Lincoln. Well, to commemorate that, I've decided to kind of merge two of my loves of history and of pipe smoking, and thanks to my good old buddy, brother from another mother, Sean the Billy Goat Ghost Cobb, and his pops, as he calls them, Oliver Piper, I've been able to procure this beautiful Abraham Lincoln pipe. Now, this is a briar pipe that was in pretty poor repair when I was able to get it from the Billy Goat, and Pops actually did an unbelievable job of restoration on it, and was able to put this red, white, and blue stem and this fix on the shank here with this looks like a casing, a shell casing. And I thought maybe, since it's the anniversary of the 155th anniversary of the recitation of the Gettysburg Address, I'd give you a couple quick facts about it, and then I'd just go ahead and just read it for you, and do a little voiceover with some pictures that I found to be interesting. But I had some notes here that I thought you guys might be interested in hearing. Gettysburg Address has 271 words, that's it. When Abraham Lincoln got to Gettysburg the night previous, on the 18th of November 1863, it was only a couple months after the Battle of Gettysburg, and because of the unbelievable carnage and casualties that had happened during those 3 days of the battle, there were a lot of wounded and dead still laying on the field. Unfortunately, at that point in time, the battle, the Civil War was still raging, so the Confederate soldiers were not treated with such pomp and circumstance as the Union soldiers were. The whole point of the Gettysburg Address was to be a few, what David Wills, the man who helped organize the consecration of the National Cemetery, referred to as a few appropriate remarks that he had requested from President Lincoln. They are held and revered as some of the most patriotic and most renowned things that Abraham Lincoln ever did, and still it's up there with, Shining City Hill, Touch the Face of God, Ask Not What Your Country Could Do For You, but What You Can Do For Your Country. It's one of the most famous American speeches of all time by an American president. And the gentleman that spoke before President Lincoln was a guy named Edward Everett, who was a contemporary and of Abraham Lincoln. He was from Massachusetts, and he was basically a very, very astute man, very gifted man intellectually, and he was a notable orator. So he would go around and write pieces and speeches and give them throughout the country and really throughout the regions at that point in time. And he spoke for 2 hours. 2 hours. Now, this is November the 19th, 1863, so this is not the most friendly of weather in Gettysburg. About 15,000 people, mostly residents of the area, but some dignitaries were there as well. President Lincoln was working on the address on the train at the White House, or the Executive Mansion, it was called at that point in time, a few days prior to, on the train ride up, and then when they came to get him in the morning of the 19th, he was still working on the speech. So he had 5 versions of the speech, most of which are very similar, but there are some discrepancies between words and tone, and there's a good amount of thought, academically speaking, that says that he ad-libbed some based on some of the versions, but he had the second version of the speech in his hand whilst he was giving the address. The site of the Soldiers National Cemetery in Gettysburg, of course, is run and operated by the National Park Service at this point in time, but the dais on which they gave the speech was believed for a long time until technology caught up with the ability to do some historical and forensic photographic analysis and discover that the dais on which Mr. Everett and President Lincoln gave their famous speeches was actually not in the National Cemetery as it is represented today. It was actually in a cemetery that is still there, called Evergreen Cemetery. It's a fascinating story about the owners of that cemetery during the time of the battle and prior to, and then of course afterwards. But it was actually in Evergreen Cemetery because Evergreen Cemetery Association had decided that they were going to make a huge annex to their cemetery to bury the Union dead. And as I said earlier, the Confederate soldiers were not allowed there for quite some time. Let's see. It's a very, very big celebration in the Gettysburg area. They have normally the weekend prior to, unless it falls, of course, on the weekend. They have a huge parade, lots of reenactors, lots of dignitaries from around the world come. There's always a big keynote speaker that comes and speaks. For the 100th anniversary, just as a corollary, well, just as an example, it was Vice President Lyndon Johnson. Now, what was going on in President Kennedy's life on November the 19th, 1963? It's pretty close to when he was actually assassinated. So he was getting ready to go to Dallas, Texas. So I surmise, and based on my reading and research, that he probably actually would have been the person to give the recitation of the speech of the keynote speaker that year. But Vice President Lyndon B. Johnson, future president, he didn't know at the time that he was giving it, and there's very good photographic evidence, video and everything of that. So it's interesting to see a video of someone who was vice president and in just a very few days was actually going to be the president because of a terrible, terrible national and international tragedy. President Lincoln is renowned and well thought of in this area, as is President Eisenhower, as they both had a huge mark on this area. And even so much that the local middle school is Lincoln Elementary, and one of the elementary schools in Gettysburg here is Eisenhower. Love to do. Maybe I can do a series or a video on President Eisenhower's association with Gettysburg, but because there's a lot of people still today that have had firsthand interactions with them. I mean, Mamie Eisenhower didn't die until 1979, and Ike, President Eisenhower died in '69, and she died in '79. So I mean, that was only a year before I was born. There's a lot of people still floating around here that have absolutely had, lots of interactions with them in their retirement years. Well, let's see what else I wanted to tell you. He gave it about 3 p.m. It lasted about 2 minutes, as it was 271 words. Edward Everett's was 2 hours long, about 13,000 words. Not many people know anything about the speech that Edward Everett gave. It was Everett that is very responsible for the collection of the versions of the speech as he was kind of putting together a book to dedicate the consecration and memorialize the consecration of the Soldiers National Cemetery. So, growing up, we went to that recitation a lot. That's a huge deal. As you could imagine, smoking some Northwoods, of course. Uh, it's wonderful to be in an area like Gettysburg and grow up in an area where issues of 150 several years ago really are every day, and it really keeps that kind of, this is really bad, let's not do that kind of stuff ever again, right at the front of your mind as you pass things like the Peace Light Memorial, and you think about the struggles, and there's a lot of talk about monuments these days, and Confederate monuments and Union monuments, and this one should be taken down and that one shouldn't be taken down, and whatever. Nobody plays that kind of crap in Gettysburg. No one even thinks to try to desecrate any monuments. Has there been some vandalization of monuments? Sure, but not like some of the stuff that went on in Charlottesville or Richmond even. It just doesn't happen here. This is a part of our local identity. We as South Central Pennsylvanians, we know the national treasures that we live on. We travel these roads all the time, and we're on the battlefield a tremendous amount. But I thought it'd be kind of neat to have a pipe to memorialize a day that wasn't, Thanksgiving, Christmas, Easter, or anything. So I have my Abraham Lincoln pipe that I'm going to be smoking on Remembrance Day every year. So I've included a few pictures with the voiceover, and one of those pictures is, of course, black and white, and it has kind of zooms in on a blurry figure of President Lincoln. That was when he was just getting to the dais. He had just arrived at the site. No other pictures or audio recordings are available of that, of course, because the technology wasn't there at the time. But it's not like it is today where you just pick up your phone, swipe right, and you got a 4K phone, or whatever. It just wasn't like that. It was, pull the lens off, wait for the sun and the moon and the stars to align, and you might get a not blurry picture. Maybe you hardly would know, and you'd be weeks and weeks and weeks till you could really know that for sure. So there's not a lot of actual photographic evidence, but there's a lot of paintings and depictions thereof and therein, and some of them are very prominently displayed in and around Gettysburg. Some of the very famous artists that have done a lot of Civil War themed stuff, like Dale Gallen, have memorialized that event, and many other parts of the Battle of Gettysburg, and many other parts of the Civil War for that matter, in oil paintings, and they hang very prominently in a lot of places in Gettysburg, including the National Park Service's Visitor Center, in which there's a whole entire room dedicated to the Gettysburg Address. And of course, in the Lincoln Memorial on the extreme western side of the National Mall in D.C., his second inaugural address and the Battle of Gettysburg, the Gettysburg Address, are enshrined in there, carved into the side of that. I would encourage anyone to go there. Also, where Dr. Martin Luther King, the place where the podium was, is I want to say engraved really, or embossed, but like carved into the granite there where that was. So if you've never been down there, and if you've never been to Gettysburg, I would say maybe you would have come not on Remembrance Day weekend the first time, because it's unbelievable amounts of people. Maybe you want to just kind of trip around and read a little bit first, but I thank you for your continued support of the channel. I know I've been on a little bit of a hiatus. Life happens, folks. It happens. But I have been watching and commenting and talking as much as I can humanly do so. I'll have some more update videos and whatnot as what's going on, but I can say that I'm very, very happy where the YTPC has been going lately. I'd just like to personally thank the several people that have sent me packages over the last couple months, especially our brother Tim Waters. He sent me a wonderful package that had a pipe and some chocolate for my kids and everything, which only lasted about 4 seconds, Tim. Lots of people have reached out to me and tried to talk to me, make sure I'm doing good. I can assure you that everything's fine. It's tough. It's tough having 2 young kids and finding time. I'm actually very surprised that my son has been quiet during this entire time. But I've recited it for you. Listen to the words. Listen to how those words might apply today when you think about the political climate of today, and then think about the political climate of back then, and a national war, national crisis in the sense of a civil war, probably one of the most important, if not the most defining moment in American history, after of course the founding of the country. So I hope you enjoyed. I've tried to read it as slowly and methodically as possible, and enjoy the pictures. All that stuff's readily available online. Learn a little bit about it. It's an interesting story about how the speech came to be, and the themes, and some of the basis, some of the pieces of literature, and Greek and Roman philosophers that he pulls from in certain parts of the speeches, and with tempo and cadence and whatnot. And just know this, that when he gave the speech, he had a mild case of smallpox as well, so he looked very, very ghastly. So just a brisk day, cold, terrible, remembrance kind of a really horrible event in American history. And I think President Lincoln, of course, said it very well. So hope you enjoy this, and if you're out there in the world learning about American history and whatnot, if you can't help any of the situations you're in, try not to hurt them. Enjoy.
Fourscore and 7 years ago, our fathers brought forth on this continent a new nation, conceived in liberty and dedicated to the proposition that all men are created equal. Now we are engaged in a great civil war, testing whether that nation, or any nation so conceived and so dedicated, can long endure. We are met on a great battlefield of that war. We have come to dedicate a portion of that field as a final resting place for those who here gave their lives that that nation might live. It is altogether fitting and proper that we should do this. But in a larger sense, we cannot dedicate, we cannot consecrate, we cannot hallow this ground. The brave men, living and dead, who struggled here, have consecrated it far above our poor power to add or detract. The world will little note, nor long remember what we say here, but it can never forget what they did here. It is for us, the living, rather, to be dedicated here to the unfinished work which they who fought here have thus far so nobly advanced. It is rather for us to be dedicated to the great task remaining before us, that from these honored dead we take increased devotion to the cause for which they gave the last full measure of devotion. That we here highly resolve that these dead shall not have died in vain, that this nation, under God, shall have a new birth of freedom, and that government of the people, by the people, for the people, shall not perish from the earth.